Evening, everyone. Um, I did talk about practicing storytelling, so I'd like to tell you a story. It's quite an interesting story. I was living in Korea. Would have been, it's now 2020, so it would have been, say, around 2012, about 8 years ago. 2012, 2013. I was working at an elementary school in Korea. I was an assistant English teacher. Great job, very nice. Um, and life was pretty easy. Single at the time. Or was I? I think I was. Yeah, I was single at the time. Or anyway, not important. Um, and it was around December. I remember it was cold. I was on the subway, and I hadn't been drinking, but it was about 11 o'clock, and it was fairly empty. The subway was fairly empty, and I was on my way home. And this little old guy comes up and he sits next to me. You can smell that he'd been drinking. And I was watching cricket. That's what I was doing. I was watching cricket on my phone. And he looked over and he said, "Oh, you like this game?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's awesome. It's the best. Cricket's great." And so anyway, he started chatting and he was a fairly nice guy. And you could tell he had a bit of confidence from the old soju. And I don't know, he said to me, "Oh," he asked me this question. It was quite funny. He said, "Oh, do you want to have breakfast with me tomorrow?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, why not? Cool, whatever." So I got his number and he called me up the next morning and he said, "Oh, look, do you mind if we push it back a week?" And I said, "Yeah, no problem. Cool." So anyway, I met up with him the following weekend, and he brought his wife and he brought his daughter. That's not my wife, by the way. So I hadn't really been expecting anything. I thought, I'd go with this bloke and we'll have a bit of breakfast and have a chat. You never know. And anyway, over the next little while, he'd call me up sometimes, and he was interested in just having a chat and this and that. And over the next about 6 months to a year, um, we sort of hung out a little bit. But anyway, back to I was working at the elementary school, and they had contracts, and I'd signed a new contract, and I planned to stay there. But then I was offered a job at a university, and of course, as you do, if someone offers you a better job, you obviously want to take it, right? So I talked to the principal and I said, "Look, I won't really need to take this position. It's better salary. It's as an English teacher, this is where we want to go." He said, "Okay, cool. You've given me some notice." I said, "I can stay for the next few months, so no problem." But anyway, the governing body stepped in and said, "If you break your contract, you won't be able to get another job until the expiry date on that contract, which was 6 months later." So anyway, they had told me this after I had already put in my resignation. So anyway, the school got a new teacher and that was fine. But I was left with no visa. And then I went to see them. It was a government position. So they said, "Look, you've sort of screwed us around. And because of that, you're going to be on a bit of a blacklist." And I was like, "Oh, I just want to change jobs. What's wrong with that?" So anyway, I ended up finishing that job. Well, I stopped working there and I wanted to go and work at the university, but they needed the release document from this government institute. Anyway, I had to leave the country to get a new visa. And I'm waiting. I went to Japan. I stayed with a good friend in Japan, and I was there for about 2 or 3 weeks. And the university they rang me and said, "Oh, look, if you can't get your visa, if you can't get this visa from the government, then we won't be able to give you this job." So anyway, at the time I was with my current wife. We weren't married yet, but I think we were getting pretty serious and we were planning on getting married. Anyway, I'm in Japan. This is the situation. I'm in Japan and I've got no visa. it's about 2 days before I won't be allowed back into Korea for some time. And I'm sitting in Japan going, what do I do? And I didn't know what to do. All my mates are just, drinking buddies and fairly, not useless, but in this situation, they weren't much help. This little old guy on the train, we'll bring him back into the story. And like I said, we'd been hanging out a bit and I was, pretty friendly with him. Anyway, I called him up and I said, look, is there anything you can do? Do you know anyone? He said, oh, what's the problem? I said, look, I've got a visa issue and the government won't give me a visa. He said, oh, hang on a second, just give me 10 minutes. So 10 minutes later, he calls back and says, oh, it's all been taken care of. I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, oh, look, I've got a friend who works in the visa department. He turns out to be fairly connected, this guy. And I'm like, wow, that's insane. I've been trying to battle with this for a long time, and this guy can just flick a switch for 10 minutes and it was all okay. Anyway, I got a visa, got back to Korea, worked at this university for 5 years and married my wife. Of course, he came to our wedding and I'm always very grateful for what he did for me. But you sort of look back and you think about these things like, what if I hadn't talked to him? What about if I was an asshole? I didn't want to talk to him. And my motto from that time on, even before that, was just to talk to whoever. I think it's easier being a guy. You don't really have any problems with it, but I've talked to a lot of different people, and not to try and get anything out of it, but you just don't know who you're going to meet. And yeah, it was a wild happening, right? You sort of think things happen for a reason. If I hadn't met him on the subway, I wouldn't have gotten a visa, I wouldn't have gone back to Korea, and I wouldn't have married my wife. Should I thank him for that? Yeah, of course I should. Anyway, that's just a story. And like I always say, you got to practice telling longer stories to people. Your English will get a lot better, right? Send me a message sometime and I'll listen to your story. Peace.